in television history was never actually a sitcom at all. Friends premiered on NBC on September 22, 1994. It ran for exactly 236 episodes across 10 seasons and ended on May 6, 2004. 52 million people watched the finale. 52 million. And in all that time, all those episodes, all those rewatches, all those people, there are details buried inside this show that have never been fully explained. Details the writers put in and walked away from. Things that happened on screen, in real dialogue, in real episodes, that point to a story underneath the one you think you watched. Today we're going through every crazy Friends theory that might actually be true, and I'm not talking about fan fiction. I'm talking about theories with real evidence, real episodes, real dialogue, things you can go back and verify yourself. By the end of this video, you will never watch Friends the same way again. Let's start with the character the show treats as the comic relief, the quirky one, the one people think is just there to make you laugh. Phoebe Buffay. Here is what the show actually tells you about Phoebe, in real episodes, in real dialogue. Her mother died by suicide from carbon monoxide poisoning when Phoebe was 14 years old. Her biological father had already abandoned the family before she was born. Her stepfather, the man her mother remarried, was sent to prison. And after all of that, at 14 years old, Phoebe Buffay was living on the streets of New York City. She slept in a burnt-out Buick LeSabre. She mugged people for food money. In Season 9, it is revealed on screen that she mugged Ross, she stole his backpack and the only existing copy of his self-published comic book when she was 14 years old and he was a teenager. She kept that comic in a box she labeled "Crap from the Street" for years. She gave it back to him in that same episode. In Season 5, in front of the entire group, Phoebe says she once stabbed a cop. Her explanation: he stabbed her first. Now look at the show she's in. A coffee shop where 6 friends always have the same couch waiting. An apartment so beautiful it would cost over $7,000 a month in today's market, but theirs costs almost nothing. Jobs that always work out. Relationships that always find their way back. Problems that solve themselves in 22 minutes. The theory is this: Friends was never a sitcom, it was a fantasy, and the fantasy belongs to Phoebe. A 14-year-old girl, homeless, hungry, living in a car in New York City, stared through the window of a coffee shop and imagined a life. Warmth, friends who always showed up, love that didn't disappear, an apartment that was always safe. A world where her problems, however dramatic, always resolved. And the show gives you the evidence that she's not part of this world, she's creating it.
Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Phoebe is the only character who never quite fits. She believes in past lives, in spirits inhabiting cats, in psychics and energy fields. The other 5 characters constantly look at her like she's from another planet, because in this theory she is the dreamer, they are the dream. And then there is this, the detail that makes this theory more than just poetic. In the very first episode of Friends, Rachel Green runs into Central Perk soaking wet in a wedding dress. She has just fled her own wedding. And the first person who truly welcomes her, not Monica, not Ross, is Phoebe. Phoebe is the one who says, without hesitation, "I don't even know you and I love you." If Friends is Phoebe's fantasy, that makes perfect sense. Because in her dream, the people she creates love each other immediately and unconditionally and always. The theory doesn't break the show. It makes it more beautiful. Because if it's true, if all 10 seasons are a fantasy built by a 14-year-old girl to survive the unsurvivable, then Friends isn't a sitcom about 6 friends in New York. It is a survival story about one woman who built an entire world in her mind just to feel less alone. Here is a fact that has bothered Friends fans since 1994. Monica and Rachel's apartment. 2 bedrooms, full bathroom, enormous living room, massive kitchen. A balcony. Located at 90 Bedford Street in Greenwich Village, Manhattan, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the most expensive city in the United States. Real estate analysts have looked at this apartment. In 1994, when the show premiered, an apartment of that size in that neighborhood would have cost between $2,500 and $3,000 a month. Today, the same apartment would rent for between $7,000 and $10,000 a month. Monica is a line cook for most of the first 2 seasons. Rachel is a waitress at a coffee shop. So hell. The show's official answer comes in Season 4. The landlord threatens to evict Monica and Rachel for illegal subletting, and that's when we learn the apartment belonged to Monica's grandmother. It was rent-controlled. Monica inherited the lease. And because of New York's rent stabilization laws, she pays $200 a month. $200 a month. And in the series finale, as Monica and Chandler pack up the last of their things to move to the suburbs, Chandler looks around that apartment one final time and says, And this is real dialogue from the show, thanks to rent control. It was a friggin' steal. Now that explains the apartment, but it doesn't explain everything else. The furniture, the lifestyle, the $4 coffee every single morning, the designer clothes, the Thanksgiving dinners, the Christmas decorations, the regular restaurant meals. Monica's parents visit the apartment constantly, they comment on the furniture, the layout, the way it looks. And at one point, Monica's father refers to the apartment as one of their better investments. The theory is that Monica's parents, Jack and Judy Geller, have been quietly subsidizing Monica's life since she moved in. Not openly. Not in a way Monica would acknowledge, because Monica's entire identity is built around her independence, her competence, her refusal to be the child her parents underestimated. And this is where the real evidence comes in. The show is very clear that Ross is Judy and Jack's favorite. They praise him constantly, they buy him things. Monica, on the other hand, is consistently treated as lesser, as the child who needs to prove herself. Her mother criticized her weight for years. Her father tells stories that center on Ross. The theory says this behavior isn't cruelty. It's guilt. The Gellers know they gave Ross everything and Monica less. And so they quietly, indirectly made sure Monica's life was comfortable through that apartment, through that rent, through the financial cushion that lets a line cook and a waitress live like they belong in a magazine. Monica's perfectionism, her obsession with cooking, her need to be the best at everything, it's not just a character quirk. The theory says it's a trauma response to parents whose approval she could never earn directly. And it means every time she cooks a perfect Thanksgiving dinner in that perfect apartment, she is trying to prove something to people who already paid for the table. This next theory is the one with real numbers behind it. Ross Geller has a son. His name is Ben. He was born in season 1. He appeared regularly for the first 8 seasons of Friends. And then in season 8, episode 12, Ben Geller appears on screen for the very last time. The show ran for 10 seasons. 2 full seasons, 54 more episodes aired after Ben's disappearance. Ross's daughter Emma was born in that same period. Ben and Emma, half-siblings, never meet on screen. There is not a single scene where we see Ross introduce his son to his newborn daughter. Ben is mentioned only 6 times in those final 54 episodes. In one of those mentions, the moments after Emma's birth, Ross's father Jack gushes over Emma as his first grandchild. Ross points out that Jack already has a 7-year-old grandson. That grandson, Ben, is then never mentioned again. Cole Sprouse, the actor who played Ben, was asked about this in a 2019 interview. Here is what he said in his own words. Critics would agree that Ross was never really the most present father, and so it doesn't surprise me too much. Cole Sprouse said that about his own character's father. The actors who played Carol and Susan were asked at a fan event what happened to Ben. Their answer was that Carol sent him to a British boarding school. That's a joke. But it's a telling one. The people who played his mothers had to invent an explanation because the show never gave them one. So what actually happened? The theory is that Ross lost custody of Ben, that Carol went to court and won full custody based on Ross's deteriorating behavior, and that by season 8, Ben was no longer in Ross's life in any meaningful way. The evidence from the show is specific. In season 5, Ross has a complete meltdown at the museum because his boss ate his Thanksgiving sandwich. He screams so loudly that the birds outside scatter. He had already been sending threatening notes to colleagues. His boss places him on mandatory sabbatical. After that episode, Ross never returns to the museum. He is later working as a professor at NYU. It is never made clear if he resigned or was fired. He has been married 3 times. His relationship history is chaotic and public. He has documented anger issues severe enough to cost him his job. The theory says Carol eventually went to court, that a judge looked at the full picture of Ross Geller and awarded full custody to Carol and her wife Susan, and that Ross, rather than fight it, quietly faded out of his son's life. The show never confirms this, but it also never denies it. It simply stops showing you Ben and never explains why. And in a show about friendship and family, when something that important disappears without explanation, that is not a continuity error. That is a story the writers decided you did not need to see. I need you to do something for a moment. I need you to imagine watching Friends with the laugh track removed. Not muted, actually removed. No audience laughter telling you what is funny, what is charming, what you are supposed to find endearing. Just the scenes, just the dialogue, just what actually happens. When you do that, something becomes very clear about Ross Geller. The theory is this: Ross was not written as a romantic lead who happened to have flaws. Ross was written as a cautionary tale, a portrait of male entitlement and emotional immaturity, framed in such a way that the laugh track convinced 2 generations of viewers it was charm. Let's go through the documented evidence. Ross Geller is married 3 times before the age of 35. His first wife, Carol, leaves him. His second marriage to Emily ends when he says the wrong woman's name at the altar. He says Rachel's name in front of Emily, her family, and everyone they invited to their wedding in London. His third marriage is to Rachel in Las Vegas while both of them are drunk. He then spends weeks trying not to get an annulment without telling Rachel before she finds out herself. 3 marriages, 3 disasters, each one directly caused by Ross's behavior. Then there is Rachel. Ross has been in love with Rachel since high school. She didn't know he existed. He carried this unrequited obsession into adulthood, built a fantasy around her, and when they finally got together, he created a written pros and cons list comparing her to another woman. This is a real episode, Season 2, Episode 8. Rachel finds the list. The list includes actual written criticisms of her appearance and intelligence. She reads it on screen. He later cheats on her and spends 7 seasons arguing that it didn't count because they were, in his words, on a break, a phrase that became one of the most iconic lines in sitcom history, and which, without the laugh track, is simply a man refusing to accept responsibility for his own actions. In Season 6, Ross begins a romantic relationship with one of his university students. He initially believes this is only frowned upon. He later discovers it is a fireable offense. He pursues the relationship anyway. Also in Season 6, on his first day of teaching at NYU, Ross delivers his entire first lecture in a fake British accent. When his friends tell him he needs to stop, he is unable to, and his entire class watches him slowly abandon a fake accent mid-lecture. His student evaluations are consistently poor. He tells himself it's because they're sad to see him go. Here is the detail that gives this theory its real weight. Chandler's eye rolls at Ross in the later seasons become a running background detail. Monica defends her brother out of loyalty, but rarely out of admiration. Joey, uncomplicated, honest, warm Joey, is the one character who most consistently fails to understand why Ross behaves the way he does. Because Joey doesn't rationalize. He just looks at Ross and genuinely doesn't understand. The theory is that the writers knew exactly what they were doing. Ross was never the hero. He was the warning, the man who mistakes possession for love, obsession for romance, and entitlement for charm. And the proof is in the ending. Rachel Green has been offered a senior position at Louis Vuitton. In Paris, the job of her life. The career she spent 10 years building, she boards the plane. Ross races to the airport, he gives a speech, she gets off the plane. The audience cheered, because the show told them to, because the laugh track had trained them for a decade to root for Ross getting what he wanted. But if you mute the audience, if you just watch what actually happens, a woman gives up the job of her life to return to a man who has hurt her repeatedly because he showed up at an airport. That is not a happy ending. That is what the show has been warning you about for 10 years. This last one is not a dark theory. This one is about something far more interesting than darkness. This one is about the possibility that the people who made Friends were operating on a completely different level than anyone realized at the time. Let's start with 3 facts that have been confirmed by the creators and cast. Fact 1. Ross and Rachel were never supposed to go beyond the pilot episode. The writers and producers have confirmed this in multiple interviews. The original plan was for Joey and Monica to be the show's central couple. Ross and Rachel were not designed to be a 10-year love story. They became one because of chemistry that emerged during filming that nobody anticipated. Fact 2. Before the pilot episode aired, director James Burrows, who directed that very first episode, took the entire cast to Las Vegas. He took them to Caesar's Palace for a night out. His reason, which he explained in interviews, was simple. He told them it would be the last time they would ever be anonymous. He was certain they were about to become famous. Fact 3. That same Caesar's Palace appears in a major Friends storyline years later. It is where Joey gets a job and where the whole group travels to support him. The writers used the exact location where the cast had their last anonymous night before fame, before everything, as a major story location. Coincidence, maybe, but here is where it becomes a theory. Friends is a show about endings disguised as a show about beginnings. Think about the pilot, 6 people in a coffee shop, young, broke, figuring it out. At one point, the group makes a joke about how this, right now, this moment, this couch, this coffee, is the best it is ever going to be. And then the show spends 10 years proving that right. Monica and Chandler get married and leave. Joey goes to Los Angeles. Phoebe gets married and her life changes. Ross and Rachel end up together, but the ending isn't joy, it's resolution. 2 people finally stopping the cycle of chaos. And the last thing that happens in the series finale is that 6 people put their keys on a counter and walk out of an apartment together for the last time. The apartment, the center of the entire show, is empty. Here is the production detail that makes this more than speculation. Gunter, the manager of Central Perk, one of the most consistent presences in the entire show, did not have a name until partway through Season 2. He appeared in multiple episodes before the writers decided who he was. The character existed before the identity did. And the original theme song for Friends was not I'll Be There For You. It was Shiny Happy People by REM. The Rembrandts replaced it before the show aired. But in Season 1, Episode 10, the New Year's Eve party plays Shiny Happy People in the background. The song that was almost the theme of the show appears, quietly, in an episode about a group of friends on the last night of a year that is ending. The theory is not that the writers planned every detail of 10 seasons from day one. Nobody could do that. The theory is something more subtle and more interesting. that the people who made Friends were deeply, consciously aware that they were making something about a specific, irreplaceable, unrepeatable moment in life, being young with people you love, before the world pulls you in different directions. And that every hidden detail, every buried callback, every Easter egg inside those 236 episodes was their way of saying, we know what this is, we know what it means, and we are trying to make something that will still matter to you 30 years from now. It's 2026 as this video goes live. Friends ended in 2004. That is more than 20 years ago, and you are still watching it. New generations are still discovering it. People who weren't born when the show aired are binge-watching it right now and feeling things they cannot explain. That is not an accident. That is what it looks like when a story is built to last. 5 theories, all of them grounded in real episodes, real dialogue, real production history. So which one do you actually believe? Is Friends Phoebe's dream? Did Ross lose custody of Ben? Was the entire show a deliberate 20-year goodbye from the people who made it? Drop your answer in the comments right now. I read every single one, and the best theories you bring down there will end up in part 2. If this video made you see something in Friends you hadn't seen before, subscribe. That is the whole point of this channel. Every week, we go back into the shows you grew up with and find the story underneath the story. I'll see you in the next one.